nothing that's sticking.
I have to go up today, so I was wondering.
Oh yeah, no, you'll be fine. It's more.
Okay.
Lee, do we need to promote Charlotte for the presentation, or is she just here watching?
Yeah, if we could promote her, that would be great. She's here to answer any technical questions.
Okay. Great. And we were running just a note. I think we're live on YouTube, but we were running over a bit in our previous meeting. So we need a little more time to get ready, and then we will start the Parks and Conservation meeting.
Amber, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Yes, you guys can hear me?
Yep.
For some reason, I cannot hear you, so just stand by.
And just another note for any public that is in attendance, we were running late from another meeting, so we're going to start this meeting just a few minutes late.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you, Karina, but there's a pretty serious echo.
How about now? Can you guys hear me?
Yep, that sounds way better. Can you hear us?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you. I'm sorry about that. I have no idea what happened, but it looks like we are good to go and we can start the meeting.
That sounds great. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start the Parks and Conservation meeting for March 16th, 2022. We continue to meet virtually. You can would you put up the other slides, Karina, please? You can contact all of council via email at council@ci.missoula.mt.us if you'd like to send us an email. You could also leave us all a voicemail at 406-552-6012. And Karina, would you go ahead and do roll?
Just a minute here. Sorry, I'm having a lot of difficulties today.
Would you like me to do roll? I can go ahead and do that.
That would work great. Please do.
Okay. I'm going to do my best here because I don't have you all the order memorized at this point. Anderson.
Present.
Becerra.
Present.
Contos.
Here.
Who comes next? Kristen. Jordan.
Present.
And Hess is absent. Let me see who else. Sorry, I don't have you guys all in order. We're going to, let's see. Carlino.
Present.
Mike Nugent.
Present.
Jennifer Savage.
Present.
I'm going all over the place. I'm sorry. Amber Sherrill is present. Gwen Jones.
Present.
Heidi West.
Present.
Sandra Vasika.
I've been after you since we first got on council, Amber. Present.
I'm all over the place. I'm sorry. I wasn't ready to take roll. I normally have you guys in order. If there's anyone that I did not call, please speak up. Otherwise, Karina, let me know when you're ready to move on.
Go ahead.
Great, thanks. So we have minutes from March 9th. If there are any changes to those minutes, please raise your hand. Otherwise, they will stand approved. I don't see any hands. So I'll take public comment on items that are not on the agenda. If you are in the public and you would like to make comment, please raise your hand now. Okay, I don't see any hands raised there either. So we'll just go on to our first agenda item. Lee is here to present on the community greenhouse gas inventory report. And Lee, would you prefer people ask questions as you move along, or would you like to present and then have us hold our questions until the end?
I think if we hold questions till the end, that would be great. I'm going to try to power through this really quickly, recognizing that we have to get out of here by noon.
Awesome. The floor is all yours.
Great. And Amber, do you mind promoting Charlotte again? She got kicked out of the meeting and is back in.
Sure, I'll do that.
So speaking of Charlotte sick, she's our climate action coordinator, and I just want to recognize that she did all of the data wrangling and wrote this report, and I just get the glory of publicly talking about it. And so thank you, Charlotte. And Charlotte's here to answer any sort of technical questions. But as I mentioned, I'm going to really power through this quickly and throw a lot at you in the next 10 minutes or so, and save questions for the end. So apologies for talking quickly and throwing a lot of data your way. But I am here today to talk about our community greenhouse gas inventory. So this is data that came from 2019. If you remember, those of you who were on council last year, I came and talked about our municipal greenhouse gas inventory, which was accounting just for the greenhouse gas emissions from our municipal operations and activities. And this is a glance at our community emissions. And so really looking at what, as a community, what we're doing. And we use this data along with the municipal greenhouse gas inventory to kind of inform our priorities and where we're spending our efforts. So I just wanted to share the boundaries that we're using. So this isn't the city of Missoula. This is our community boundary as identified in the Our Missoula Growth Policy. And so it's a little bit larger than the city of Missoula, but kind of represents what we identify as the Missoula community. Here's our results in a quick glance. At the time of 2019, our population was approximately 92,650 people. Of that, we had over 1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide released in that year, which equates to about 12.1 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per person. I'll get into some comparisons in a few slides just to kind of show you how we compare to other communities, but the spoiler is that we're pretty average in terms of communities who have climate action goals and are working towards reducing emissions. The pie chart you see really gives a big picture overview of where those emissions are coming from. So we spend a lot of time talking about green building and green development and how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the homes, commercial and industrial buildings in our community, because you can see those gray and orange pieces of the pie make up a significant portion of the greenhouse gas emissions in our community. Transportation is another huge one, and that's why we focus a lot of our energy there. And then we kind of have the smaller pieces of solid waste and water and wastewater, which I'll kind of get into a little bit of the specifics of why the solid waste piece in particular isn't a super accurate look when we're looking at kind of global emissions, but this is a local snapshot of what we're emitting as a community. So I will say that this is a really condensed version of the report. The report has been attached to the meeting minutes or the meeting agenda, and so you can kind of peruse it, but I'm just pointing out some of the highlights. So when we're looking at our commercial and industrial sector, 70% of the emissions is from electricity use, whereas 30% is a result of natural gas use. On each of these slides, we kind of tried to do some equivalencies just because it's confusing to hear metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalency. What does that mean? And so we tried to do kind of a snapshot of what that means. And so passenger vehicles and rail cars worth of coal burned. So this is our biggest sector, is our commercial and industrial energy use, followed by transportation. So the transportation you can see in the graph at the bottom, the vast majority of that comes from tailpipe emissions. And so we are talking about transportation of vehicles and buses and those sorts of things throughout our community. There's some advanced calculations to try to understand kind of the airport and rail link, how much of those emissions come just from those uses kind of in our community boundary. And it's not a perfect science, but we have a pretty good accurate look at what that looks like. And so we're focusing a lot of energies on sustainable transportation, electric vehicles, those sorts of things that can help drive down our transportation emissions. Residential energy is another big one. Interesting that on residential energy, we see a lot more natural gas use than we do in the commercial and industrial sector. It's about 50-50, and you can see on the graphs at the bottom that electricity use is a lot lower in residential, but natural gas use kind of flip-flops and is a bit higher. Solid waste. So this is a look at the emissions coming from our local landfill. While this is an accepted inventory reporting method, it's not, oh yeah.
I just want to let you know you're getting messages from your computer that are coming up on the screen. I just saw one come up, so I don't know how you're sharing, but I just want to make you aware.
Okay.
Of that. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
That's okay. So solid waste is an interesting one because what we're accounting for with that 5% piece of the pie is just the amount of emissions that are coming from our local landfill. So we're sending materials to the landfill and then they're emitting methane as they come out. It's a little bit misleading because when we look at the global emissions associated with mining, production, transportation, and disposal of the goods and materials that we use, that actually accounts for somewhere between 35 and 40% of the pie when we're looking at those global big picture emissions. But when we're just looking at local emissions, it just accounts for about 5%. And so I just really wanted to point that out because it is very significant when we look outside of the boundary of Missoula, outside of the boundary of Montana, and look at that global perspective. With that, the graph at the bottom, if you notice, we commissioned a study in 2019 or 2020 for 2019 also data that looked at what's going into our landfill and made some assumptions. And that graph at the bottom, the gray represents materials that can't be diverted from the landfill, but all of it represents materials that are going into the landfill. And so basically what this is saying is that the vast majority of the materials that are currently going into our landfill in Missoula could be diverted if people were participating, if we had the services and programs set up to encourage that. Water and wastewater is interesting. It just accounts for about 1% of our community emissions inventory. If those of you who remember the report on the municipal inventory, it actually makes up more than half of our local municipal greenhouse gas emissions. It's very significant when we look at it in that context. It's still a lot. It's over 10,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide in a year. But when we look at it on the community scale, it really gets dwarfed. And so it's kind of an interesting metric. New this year, based on data that we were able to collect and systems of processing that data, we were able to look at carbon sequestered through our urban forest. So this is really a new thing that we're delving into, that Charlotte's really working on understanding how to quantify how much carbon is pulled out of the atmosphere by our trees and our grasslands and different types of things, and healthy soils. All of those can actually pull carbon out of the air, which kind of negates the carbon that we're emitting. So our 82 acres of urban forests within Missoula's city limits accounts for about 1% of carbon sequestration of our greenhouse gas emissions. Not a ton, but also not insignificant. It's our wastewater treatment plant. Or sorry, our water and wastewater emissions. So I mentioned that we kind of do a comparison. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, except to say that we looked at Bozeman, we looked at Boulder, Colorado, and Boise, Idaho, to understand where their emissions are coming from, and then how much emissions per person. And we're kind of, it's all kind of similar, and it's really interesting because we all have really ambitious climate action goals and are at different levels of implementation of those goals. And yet the city of Boulder, Colorado is emitting more per person than the city of Missoula. And the city of Boise is emitting less per person than the city of Missoula. And so it's just interesting to kind of mark where we are as compared to our community partners. So this is a lot of pages that are included in the report that kind of talk about, well, what are we doing about all of this? My position was hired in May of last year, and what I heard very strongly when I started is that my position is meant to be very implementation focused. The city has spent years and years coming up with plans and roadmaps, and while those things are ever changing and ever evolving, we're really focused on implementing and actually driving down those emissions so that we can have positive reports when we look year after year. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of those things that we're working on. So in the energy and building sector, the city adopted a goal of 100% clean electricity by 2030, and we are working locally and with community partners with Northwestern Energy to try to drive that goal to reality. We're partnering with Climate Smart Missoula on a Buildings for the Future program, which includes an Electrify Missoula campaign. So if you remember that slide on the residential piece about how much natural gas is being used in the residential sector, the Electrify Missoula campaign is aimed at reducing that and encouraging people to switch fuels and to electrify their homes. So that will hopefully have some significant impact on those numbers. On transportation, I'm sure you all know that the Mountain Line has adopted several electric buses into their fleet and are increasing that all the time. We're working on an electric vehicle plan for the city, electric vehicle charging, all of those sorts of things. Missoula in Motion is always, encouraging folks to use alternative transportation rather than driving. Significant efforts happening in zero waste. In 2016, the city of Missoula purchased the local compost facility, which gives us kind of local ownership over what goes in there and what we do with those materials. We're working on education programs with Home Resource to encourage business zero waste, to get more opportunities and access for people to recycle and compost in our community. Carbon neutrality in city operations, there's been significant amount of efforts in that area. We are wrapping up a big project with McKinstry to do a energy performance audit of the city's buildings and kind of make recommendations and some significant capital projects to drive down those emissions. We also just recently initiated a climate action strategic initiative working team, which is made up of city leadership. Amber's on that team, Jordan's on that team. And we're looking at how to implement a climate lens across the city. And what that would do would add in some criteria for decision making at every decision point that the city makes. So we're excited about that initiative. The last thing I think I want to mention for sake of time is that typically we try to compare where we're at versus where we were in the past. And there was an inventory done in 2014. We saw kind of wildly different results based on what we gathered in 2019 versus 2014. And we really wanted to understand that. And so we hired a consultant to take a look at both and help us understand why the results were so different. And in a nutshell, there's a lot of factors. The way that we collect and interpret data, the way that Northwestern Energy defines different sectors of data, those have all changed. Our population has changed drastically. Different things that made it so that we actually didn't feel that it was really relevant to do a side-by-side comparison of 2014 versus 2019. We did include the results report here in case anyone's interested in seeing those specifics of why. And we are planning on doing another one for this year, 2022, so that we can do that side-by-side comparison using the same methods of collection and the same methods of interpretation. So I will be back in front of you probably in a year's time with that comparison so we can see how we're doing as a community. So that was kind of a whirlwind, and thank you all for sticking through it and take any questions that you have. Looks like Kristen, you're up first.
Hey, hold on. Do you mind stopping your sharing of your screen? And yeah, thanks. That was great. I just have a couple comments, and then I think Kristen, you brought your hand down, so I'll have you go right after. First of all, Lee, it's really interesting to see the water and wastewater when you look at it across the community instead of just for city operations, because when I saw that on your presentation, I was like, I think there's been an error there. I think like she forgot a zero or something. So I think that's just really interesting. And I would say, for all of council's benefit, but maybe the new counselors, that there is, and for the public, that there is a really a big, like across department groupings, department heads looking at what this climate lens looks like. And I, as someone that sitting on council, I think you all will really appreciate the fact that when the projects come to us, they're going to have looked through we haven't finished it, but they're going to have been looking through a climate lens, and we're trying to figure out exactly what all the factors and criteria we need to consider in that are. And they're sometimes they could be really different if you're talking about wastewater or you're talking about streets. If you're talking about parking. So the conversations are really interesting, and it's hard and it's complicated, but I think it is going to be invaluable, not only for us, but also for all those department heads to be considering that all the time. Kristen, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. I had a question. I just wanted to clarify. You showed a slide that said something about 1.4 million trips per day. I think it was like your second or third slide. And I just wanted to say, is that how many cars on the, like, those are trips. I guess it is what it is. It's just, those are how many times we are all going out every day here in Missoula County. And that was 1.4 million. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Every day. Okay, thank you. The second question I have, and I am really supportive of the 100% renewable by 2030, but I'm kind of wondering, does it feel like we're on track for that? Like, what do you think the odds are of us making it by then? And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. And it is, the transportation piece is shocking. I was shocked when I saw that too. But yeah, it's trips across from one side of the boundary to the other every day, buses, cars, all those sorts of things. And 100% clean electricity is, the best I can say is we're working on it, and we don't quite know what the outcome is going to be. A lot of our efforts are kind of going down one road. So currently we're working with Northwestern Energy to try to develop a green power product where businesses and municipalities and people can buy into local renewable energy to source clean electricity. And if we're successful, awesome. We probably, as a city at least, will meet our goal in that. If we're not successful, then we have to pivot and figure out, okay, what is another solution that we can explore? And so it's really variable, and it depends on the success that we have in any given moment, which, yeah, it makes the job really interesting and thought-provoking. So, yeah.
And I would also add that Lee and Charlotte are very, very aware and good at pivoting, because they know that this work takes a lot of pivoting. Stacy, go ahead.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate this presentation and how quickly you ran through some very dense information. I would love, and I know we're not doing screen sharing, so I'll try to do my best to describe it, but the slide that you had up talking about solid waste and the bottom of the 4 categories: single family, multifamily, commercial, self-hauled, and then construction and demolition. I felt like this was probably the case, and really happy to see that this is being reinforced with data. But the construction and demolition is the largest contributor of solid waste to our landfill. And they also have the largest orange section. And orange section, I think, according to your graph, is recoverable C and D. Could you talk a little bit about that? And I have a follow-up point that I'd like to make, if I'm allowed, Madam Chair.
Of course, go ahead, Lee. You're muted.
Sorry, I muted myself instead of unmuted. The majority of materials coming from the construction world, unfortunately, are not being deconstructed and reused. They're being demolished. So kind of homes that are being raised so that something new can be built, they're just being knocked down and then just kind of blanket sent to the landfill. So that is really absolutely a huge area of focus, that there are all of these valuable materials that are currently going into the landfill as a result of the construction industry, and something we're really focusing on, especially as the city announced all of these new building permits that, you know, they approved in 2021, and the incredible growth in our city. How many buildings are being knocked down in order to, you know, continue that growth? And how do we encourage developers to deconstruct and have those materials stay local in our market rather than sending them to the landfill?
Thanks so much. That is such an amazing point to make. I am so glad we have it in graph form, because a lot of the times, some of the projects that we approve within the TIF realm is giving money back to developers to pay for the cost offset of deconstruction versus demolition. And that is a way that we as a community can put funds towards a larger community goal of lowering our waste that goes to municipal landfill. And it has a tie-in with decreasing our, carbon footprint, our emissions, and things like that. And I think that a lot of times the attack against TIF is, oh, we're just giving this developer this money just because we like them or whatever. No, it is because they are performing a public good, enhancing a right of way, or in this case, deconstructing a building, which is more timely and expensive for them to do so than demolishing it, but the benefits for the larger community. And so I would love it if that could sort of, the presentation that is multiple slides long, super well put together, hoping it's easy to access. But I think that that is such an amazing tie-in, that the reason why we invest in that, because it is such a large section of what goes to the solid, to our landfill, and not and the long-term ramifications and benefits that reducing the amount goes to landfill has on our community. So thank you so much for that in a really easily digestible form. Excellent job on the presentation and report.
Thanks, Stacy. And I just want to point out too that we, through CBO grant, are supporting Home Resource in exploring how to bring more deconstruction into our community outside of TIP funded projects. And so that's a big focus.
Thanks. Heidi, go ahead. And then I know there are some people that need to get off for a noon meeting. So we'll try to wrap it up unless there's some other questions. Heidi, go ahead.
So I had a question about, I guess if you could talk a little bit more about how soils factor into the carbon sink. I know from my days in college that soil is our largest carbon sink, and I was wondering if we were doing anything to quantify the amount of carbon we're losing from construction related soil removal, because I watched the lot 2 doors over, they scraped off the top 2 feet of topsoil, which is where most of the carbon is, and how that factors into our larger footprint.
Yeah, great question. We haven't really delved into development yet. There's lots of science that says healthy soil sequesters more carbon. I know Jason Duffin out at Garden City Compost is planning for this spring kind of a pilot. He's working with a local farmer where they're going to put compost on one side of the farm and then traditional fertilizer application on the other, just to kind of understand how things grow better when you apply compost and incorporate healthier soils into growing. And so, I hope that there's a trickle down effect, and I hope there's some efforts we can do to, keep topsoil, because it is healthy and good for our environment.
Thank you. And if anyone in the public has any public comment on this agenda item, could raise your hand. Okay, I don't see anyone. I don't see any other council people's hands up. Lee, thank you for that very speedy presentation on a very dense, important topic, and Charlotte for all your work on that. And I'm sure we're going to be seeing both of you back in this committee with some regularity. And I appreciate kind of just all the efforts going forward and getting us all up to date on them. So with that, I am going to adjourn the Parks and Conservation. Whoops, thanks everyone.